Lucas Bennett had always trusted his wife, Grace Morgan, without question. After 10 years of marriage, he never imagined that doubt could creep in. It wasn't until an unusual conversation over dinner that his world began to unravel. Grace had casually mentioned, almost as though testing the waters, how couples in strong relationships could survive an affair. Lucas, taken aback, pressed her for clarification. She brushed it off as a hypothetical discussion. But that night, Lucas couldn't shake the chill of unease that had settled over him. Over the next few weeks, Grace's behavior became erratic. She spent long hours at work and began obsessively guarding her phone, which was a sharp deviation from her usual open demeanor. Suspicion gnawed at Lucas, who found himself scouring their shared moments for clues. One evening, Grace came home smelling of a cologne that wasn't his. When he asked about it, she claimed she had hugged a colleague after a promotion announcement. Her evasiveness only deepened Lucas's suspicions. He began piecing together little inconsistencies, texts she would hurriedly delete, unexplained absences, and her sudden attention to her appearance. The final straw came when Lucas accidentally stumbled upon her laptop, which she had carelessly left open in their study. A chat window revealed messages exchanged with a man named Daniel Hayes. Daniel was the head of the environmental planning department where Grace worked. Their messages weren't overtly incriminating, but there was an intimacy to their tone that couldn't be ignored. That weekend in the cabin was unforgettable, one message read. Lucas felt his stomach churn. He scrolled further and found photos, Grace and Daniel laughing together, their body language unmistakably intimate. Unable to contain his rage, Lucas confronted Grace that night. At first, she denied everything, accusing him of invading her privacy. But under the weight of his evidence, she finally confessed. Their relationship had been ongoing for 16 years, predating her marriage to Lucas. She claimed it had started as an emotional connection but evolved into something more after their wedding. Lucas felt humiliated. The life they had built together was a lie. Every milestone, their honeymoon, buying their first home, celebrating anniversaries, was now tainted. Grace admitted that she had tried to end things with Daniel multiple times but always found herself drawn back to him. What hurt Lucas the most wasn't just the betrayal, but the elaborate deception. He learned that Grace and Daniel had coordinated their vacations under the guise of work trips. They had celebrated their anniversaries, Lucas's and Daniel's, with calculated precision. Grace had even shared Lucas's deepest fears and vulnerabilities with Daniel, mocking him in private messages. In a moment of rage, Lucas decided to confront Daniel directly. He showed up unannounced at Daniel's office, causing a scene that left the entire staff buzzing. But Daniel remained calm, even smug, as though Lucas's outrage was an expected inconvenience. "She'll always choose me," Daniel said coldly, before security escorted Lucas out. The humiliation didn't end there. Grace's affair became public knowledge when Daniel's wife, who had been suspicious herself, exposed everything on social media. Photos, text conversations, and explicit details of their trysts were leaked. Lucas found himself bombarded with pitying glances and whispers from neighbors and colleagues. What made the betrayal unbearable was the realization that Grace had groomed their entire marriage around maintaining the affair. She had chosen their home's location to stay close to Daniel's neighborhood. Even their circle of friends unknowingly facilitated their secret rendezvous, with Grace using group events as cover. Lucas's trust was shattered. Nights were sleepless as he replayed every moment of their marriage, wondering how he could have missed the signs. Grace attempted to justify her actions, claiming that she loved both men in different ways. But for Lucas, her words were hollow, incapable of repairing the deep wounds she had inflicted. Each revelation felt like a new wound. Daniel had attended their wedding, smiling as he watched Lucas vow eternal love to Grace. He had sent congratulatory gifts for every significant event in their lives, gifts that Lucas now realized were laced with mockery. Grace's deceit wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a systematic humiliation that had robbed Lucas of his dignity. Lucas knew he had to make a decision. Staying meant swallowing his pride and living under the shadow of Grace's infidelity. Leaving meant dismantling the life he had painstakingly built. But one thing was clear, the Grace he thought he knew was gone. replaced by a stranger who had shared her heart and body with another man for nearly 2 decades. As Lucas sat in their empty living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life he no longer recognized, he felt a flicker of clarity. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of an illusion. Lucas had hoped the worst was over. The revelation of Grace's affair with Daniel Hayes had shattered his world, but he was beginning to think he could navigate the wreckage. He tried to focus on his children, his pride and joy, the 2 constants in his life that gave him purpose. 8-year-old Chloe, with her dimpled smile and infectious laughter, became his anchor in the storm. But what Lucas didn't know was that the greatest betrayal was yet to come. The idea for a DNA test wasn't his. It was a suggestion from a colleague, spoken half-jokingly at lunch one day. "If she cheated for that long, how can you even be sure the kids are yours?" the man had said, chuckling over his sandwich. Lucas had laughed along, brushing it off as an absurd idea. But that night, as he tucked Chloe into bed, the thought lingered. She had Grace's wavy hair and delicate features, but Lucas couldn't deny that her eyes, a striking green, looked nothing like his or Grace's hazel. He'd always assumed they were from some distant relative, a quirk of genetics, but now those eyes stared back at him like an accusation. Lucas decided to put his mind at ease, convincing himself it was paranoia. He ordered an at-home DNA test kit. The results arrived in an email 2 weeks later. Lucas sat at his desk, his palms sweating as he opened the file. His breath caught in his throat as the words stared back at him. Not a match. The room spun. He read and reread the document, hoping it was a mistake. But the science was clear. Chloe was not his daughter. The implications hit him like a freight train. Chloe wasn't his. She was Daniel's. Lucas felt the bile rise in his throat as he realized what this meant. Grace's affair hadn't just been an emotional and physical betrayal. It had invaded the sanctity of his family. Chloe, the little girl who called him Daddy, shared no part of him. He confronted Grace that night. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, when he thrust the printed DNA results into her lap. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and despair. Grace's face went pale as she skimmed the document. She tried to deny it at first, claiming the test must be wrong. But when Lucas pressed her, the truth came spilling out. Grace admitted she had known for years. Chloe had been conceived during one of her trysts with Daniel, but she had decided not to tell Lucas, fearing the fallout. "You decided?" Lucas roared, his fists clenched. "You decided that I'd live a lie, that I'd raise another man's child without knowing? You stole my life, Grace. You stole my daughter." Grace broke down, sobbing into her hands, but her tears did nothing to quell Lucas's fury. He demanded to know if Daniel was aware. To his horror, Grace revealed that he was. They had agreed to keep the secret for Chloe's sake, deciding it was better for her to believe Lucas was her father. Lucas felt humiliated, betrayed on a level he couldn't comprehend. He had been used as a prop, a placeholder for another man's child. And the knowledge that Daniel, the smug, condescending man who had openly taunted him, had been complicit in this deception made his blood boil. The next morning, Lucas packed an overnight bag and left the house. He needed space to think. But wherever he went, he couldn't escape the gnawing pain of betrayal. Photos of Chloe on his phone now felt like daggers to his heart. Was every memory with her a lie? Was the love he felt for her real, or had it been manufactured by Grace's deceit? In a moment of desperation, Lucas decided to confront Daniel again. This time, he wasn't looking for answers. He wanted vengeance. He drove to Daniel's office, storming past the receptionist and barging into his corner office. Daniel, clearly startled, stood up from his desk. "Lucas, this is..." "You've been laughing at me for years," Lucas spat, throwing the DNA results onto the desk. "Tell me, Daniel, did you enjoy watching me raise your daughter? Did it feel good knowing you'd taken everything from me?" Daniel's calm demeanor faltered. For the first time, Lucas saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. But Daniel quickly composed himself. "I did what I thought was best for Chloe," he said, his voice measured. "This isn't about you, Lucas. It's about her. Don't you dare pretend this was for her," Lucas snapped. "This was for you. You were too much of a coward to take responsibility for your own child. The argument escalated until security arrived, escorting Lucas out of the building. But Lucas didn't care. He had said what he needed to say. When Lucas returned home, he found Grace sitting with their 12-year-old son, Caleb. The boy looked confused and worried as Lucas walked in. "Mom says you're mad at her," he said. "Is it about Chloe?" Lucas froze. How could he possibly explain this to his son? He crouched down, his voice trembling as he said, "No, buddy. It's not about you or Chloe. It's just grown-up stuff." But Caleb wasn't satisfied with that answer. Over the next few days, he began asking more questions, sensing the tension in the house. Eventually, Lucas and Grace decided to sit him down and tell him the truth. The conversation was excruciating. Caleb looked devastated, his world crumbling as he learned that his sister wasn't his full sibling and that their family wasn't what he thought it was. Word of the scandal spread quickly through their community. Grace's affair and the paternity revelation became the subject of gossip at school drop-offs and neighborhood gatherings. Lucas could feel the pitying stares and hear the whispered conversations. Friends and colleagues reached out, offering hollow condolences that only deepened his humiliation. But the worst part was Chloe. The little girl continued to call him Daddy, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around her. Lucas struggled with his feelings, torn between his love for her and the pain of knowing she wasn't his. Every time she hugged him or asked for his help with homework, he felt like he was betraying himself. One night, as Lucas was tucking Chloe into bed, she looked up at him with those green eyes that haunted him. "Daddy," she said, "why are you sad all the time now?" Lucas felt his throat tighten. He wanted to tell her everything, to scream the truth into the void. But instead, he kissed her forehead and whispered, "It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault." As he left her room, Lucas realized that the betrayal wasn't just his burden to bear. It had seeped into every corner of his life, infecting his family like a poison. The question now wasn't whether he could forgive Grace or Daniel. It was whether he could find a way to rebuild his life and protect the children who were caught in the crossfire. The news of Margaret Ross's inheritance arrived at an especially fragile time for Lucas Bennett. The DNA revelation had fractured his family, leaving an atmosphere of unease in their once cozy home. Lucas had spent weeks grappling with how to move forward, balancing his anguish with the need to shield his children, both Caleb and Chloe, from the full brunt of the fallout. When a letter from Daniel's mother, Margaret Ross, arrived by courier, Lucas was too emotionally drained to anticipate its significance. Margaret Ross had always been a figure of distant curiosity in Lucas's life. He had met her only a handful of times at work-related events Grace had dragged him to over the years. She was a formidable woman, wealthy, sharp-tongued, and unapologetically blunt. Though she seemed cordial with Lucas in passing, he had never felt warmth from her. The letter, neatly typed on expensive stationery, began with pleasantries before cutting straight to the matter at hand. Margaret had learned of Chloe's paternity through Daniel, who, true to form, had framed the revelation as a moral struggle. In her letter, Margaret wrote, "While my son has been a profound disappointment to me, Chloe is innocent in all of this. She deserves to benefit from her rightful place in the Ross family, no matter how inconvenient this truth may be for all involved." The inheritance was substantial, over $1 million, set aside in a trust for Chloe. Margaret, never one to mince words, made her disdain for both Daniel and Grace clear. "My son lacks the discipline or moral compass to be entrusted with this responsibility," she wrote. "I am leaving the management of this trust to Lucas Bennett, a man who has displayed far more integrity in this sordid mess than either of them." Lucas's first reaction was disbelief. He reread the letter multiple times, struggling to reconcile Margaret's generous act with the humiliation it carried. The money was undoubtedly a gift for Chloe's future, but the fact that it came from Daniel's mother felt like another cruel twist in an already unbearable saga. Lucas imagined the whispers that would ripple through their community once this became known. The man who had raised another's child now tasked with managing her biological family's wealth. When he told Grace about the letter, her reaction was a mixture of relief and awkward gratitude. "It's for Chloe," she said softly, her voice tinged with guilt. "She deserves this." She does, Lucas agreed bitterly. But you and Daniel don't. And now I'm the one who has to carry this on my shoulders. The news of the inheritance reached Daniel almost immediately. True to form, he showed up unannounced at Lucas's home, his polished arrogance barely concealing his irritation. Chloe, unaware of the underlying tensions, ran to greet him as Uncle Danny. Watching her hug the man who had fathered her in secret was almost more than Lucas could bear. "We need to talk," Daniel said, his voice tight. Lucas crossed his arms. "Make it quick." Daniel wasted no time launching into his grievances. "This trust, my mother had no right to cut me out of it. I'm Chloe's father. I should have a say." "Your mother made it very clear why she chose me," Lucas replied, his voice cold. "She doesn't trust you. Neither do I." The argument escalated, with Daniel accusing Lucas of trying to undermine his relationship with Chloe. Lucas countered by pointing out that Daniel had spent years avoiding responsibility, leaving Lucas to play the role of father. Chloe, drawn by the raised voices, appeared in the doorway, her confused expression silencing both men. Lucas forced himself to de-escalate, ushering Daniel out with a pointed, "We're done here." The inheritance brought mixed reactions from the rest of the family. Caleb, still reeling from the revelation about Chloe's paternity, struggled with feelings of resentment. "So, she gets $1 million because of Daniel?" he asked one evening, his tone sharp. "What about me, Dad? What do I get?" Lucas knelt beside his son, looking him in the eye. "You get the truth," he said. "You get a father who will always be honest with you, no matter how hard it is. And you'll get every bit of support I can give you to build the life you deserve." It wasn't the answer Caleb wanted, but Lucas hoped it was enough for now. He refused to let the money become a wedge between his children. Grace, meanwhile, attempted to mend fences with Margaret. She called to express her gratitude for the inheritance, but Margaret's icy tone left no room for reconciliation. "Let's not pretend this is anything more than it is, Grace," Margaret said curtly. "You've already taken enough from Lucas. Don't think for a moment I've done this for you." The conversation left Grace visibly shaken, but Lucas couldn't bring himself to comfort her. Her betrayal still felt like an open wound, and he wasn't sure if he'd ever be able to forgive her. Managing the trust became both a responsibility and a source of constant humiliation for Lucas. The legal paperwork required frequent communication with Margaret's lawyers, a process that underscored his role as an outsider in Chloe's biological lineage. Every signature, every phone call felt like a reminder that Chloe's future was tied to a man Lucas despised. Yet, despite the emotional toll, Lucas couldn't bring himself to walk away. Chloe was still his daughter in every way that mattered. He vowed to ensure the money was used to give her every opportunity in life, opportunities that Daniel, with his selfishness and irresponsibility, could never provide. The inheritance also forced the family to re-evaluate their priorities. Extended relatives, initially drawn into the drama by gossip, began offering genuine support. Lucas's parents stepped in to spend more time with Caleb, giving him a sense of stability. Even Grace's estranged sister reached out, offering to help with Chloe whenever Lucas needed a break. These gestures, though small, reminded Lucas that he wasn't entirely alone. Slowly, a new kind of family dynamic began to emerge, one built on shared responsibility rather than blind trust. Despite the growing support, tensions remained high. Community gossip turned the inheritance into a source of public spectacle. At school events, other parents whispered behind Lucas's back, speculating about the details of his family's implosion. Grace bore the brunt of the judgment, her reputation irreparably damaged. Lucas, however, found an unexpected ally in Margaret. Though their interactions were sparse and strictly business, her respect for Lucas's integrity became apparent over time. In one rare phone call, she told him, "You're doing right by Chloe. That's more than I can say for my own son." As the months passed, Lucas began to find a sense of purpose in managing the trust. He worked with financial advisors to ensure Chloe's future was secure, using the inheritance to plan for her education and other long-term needs. Though the pain of betrayal still lingered, Lucas found solace in the knowledge that he was building a stable foundation for her. In the end, the inheritance became more than just a financial windfall. It was a symbol of resilience. It forced the family to confront their fractures, rebuild trust where possible, and redefine what it meant to be a family. For Lucas, it was a painful but necessary step toward healing, one that reminded him that even in the face of betrayal, there was still hope for a better future. The scandal surrounding Grace and Daniel's affair, already a festering wound in Lucas's personal life, exploded into public view in a way he could have never imagined. The whispers that had been circulating within their community turned into a full-blown spectacle when a former colleague of Daniel's leaked incriminating emails and photos to the local press. Within days, Grace and Daniel's secret was on every news outlet and social media platform. The affair was no longer just a family matter. It became a public disgrace. Lucas woke one morning to find his phone flooded with messages. Friends, colleagues, and even distant relatives had sent him links to the exposé. The headline alone sent a chill down his spine. Power couple's double life, long-time affair exposed in suburban scandal. The article included damning details about how Grace and Daniel had carried on their affair for over a decade, using work trips and company resources to sustain their secret relationship. Worse still, the article hinted at potential financial misconduct. It alleged that Grace and Daniel had falsified expense reports to fund their romantic getaways, billing luxurious trips to their employer under the guise of professional retreats. The exposé painted them as not just adulterers, but as liars who had manipulated their positions of power for personal gain. The fallout was swift. Grace was summoned to a meeting with her employer, who had no choice but to suspend her pending an internal investigation. Daniel faced similar consequences, though his was even more dramatic. His name was publicly scrubbed from the company website, and his access to corporate accounts was immediately revoked. For Lucas, the humiliation was unbearable. He couldn't step outside without feeling the weight of prying eyes and whispered judgments. At the grocery store, at Caleb's soccer games, even during Chloe's school drop-offs, the looks followed him. He overheard one parent mutter, "That's the guy whose wife cheated for 16 years. Can you imagine? It wasn't just the strangers who judged him, even his friends seemed unsure of how to act around him. Some reached out with awkward attempts at sympathy, while others distanced themselves entirely, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Then came the lawsuit. A whistleblower from Grace and Daniel's workplace filed a civil suit on behalf of the company, accusing them of fraud. The allegations claimed that their misuse of company funds had cost the organization tens of thousands of dollars. The lawsuit quickly became another media sensation, dragging both Grace and Daniel into the spotlight as examples of corporate corruption and personal betrayal. Lucas was named in the lawsuit, not as a defendant, but as a potential witness. His life was once again thrust under a microscope as lawyers began questioning him about Grace's travel habits and any knowledge he might have had of her duplicity. Lucas, already struggling to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Caleb and Chloe, found himself reliving the nightmare with every deposition and court filing. The lawsuit amplified the humiliation for everyone involved. Grace's lawyer attempted to frame the fraud as minor errors in accounting, but the evidence was overwhelming. Detailed spreadsheets showed how Grace and Daniel had manipulated their expense reports, labeling five-star hotels and romantic dinners as client meetings and strategy sessions. One damning email even included a joke from Daniel to Grace. "Think we can bill the wine to team morale? Winky face." As the case gained traction, more skeletons tumbled out of Grace and Daniel's closets. Former coworkers came forward with stories of suspicious behavior, extended lunch breaks, last-minute work trips, and unexplained absences that now painted a clear picture of their affair. Some colleagues admitted to long-held suspicions, but most had turned a blind eye, not wanting to involve themselves in the drama. The media frenzy grew even worse when Chloe's paternity became public knowledge. A journalist digging into the story uncovered the connection, turning it into yet another headline: DNA bombshell, child at the heart of scandal. This revelation brought fresh waves of humiliation for Lucas and the children, who were now dragged further into a mess they hadn't created. Grace and Daniel's personal lives unraveled alongside their professional ones. Their friends, once a close-knit circle of colleagues and neighbors, began cutting ties. Invitations to events were rescinded, and they became pariahs in their community. Daniel's wife, furious over his betrayal and the public disgrace, filed for divorce and sought full custody of their children. Grace, too, faced the bitter reality of her choices as Caleb and Chloe became distant, their trust in her irreparably damaged. The financial repercussions were devastating. Both Grace and Daniel lost their jobs, and with the lawsuit demanding restitution for the misused funds, they were forced to liquidate assets. Grace moved out of the family home, leaving Lucas and the children to pick up the pieces. Her new apartment was small and stark, a far cry from the life she had once enjoyed. For Daniel, the consequences were even harsher. His ex-wife won a significant portion of his remaining assets in the divorce, leaving him financially crippled. Lucas, meanwhile, did his best to shield Caleb and Chloe from the chaos. He met with their school administrators to ensure they were given extra support, and he limited their exposure to the news. Still, there was no escaping the fallout entirely. Caleb began acting out, lashing out at both Lucas and Grace, while Chloe became withdrawn, struggling to understand why her family was falling apart. The humiliation Lucas endured during this time was almost unbearable. At work, colleagues treated him with a mixture of pity and discomfort, as if his mere presence reminded them of the sordid scandal. Even in casual conversations, he felt the need to justify himself, to remind people that he had been the victim, not the perpetrator. Despite the turmoil, Lucas found moments of solace in his children. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of depositions, he came home to find Chloe sitting at the kitchen table, drawing a picture of their family. In the picture, she had drawn Lucas with a wide smile, holding her hand. She looked up and said, "I know you're my real daddy, even if everyone says something different." Her words, so innocent and pure, gave Lucas the strength to keep going. Though the world seemed intent on tearing them apart, he resolved to fight for his family's future, no matter how difficult the road ahead. The scandal had destroyed Grace and Daniel's lives, but Lucas vowed it wouldn't destroy his. Lucas Bennett's decision to file for divorce wasn't made lightly. He had wrestled with the implications for weeks, weighing the damage already inflicted against the possibility of salvaging what remained of their broken family. But every time he looked at Grace, he saw not the woman he had loved for over a decade, but a stranger who had destroyed his trust and humiliated him. The divorce was inevitable, a final, bitter conclusion to their shattered marriage. The filing itself was a straightforward affair. Lucas's lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for protecting wronged spouses, assured him that his case was strong. With the affair, the public scandal, and her neglect of the children's emotional needs, retaining custody is almost guaranteed, she said. Grace, upon receiving the papers, was livid. "This isn't just about us," she argued during one of their many confrontations. "We're still a family. Divorce will ruin the kids." "The affair ruined the kids," Lucas snapped, his voice cold. "You did this, Grace." "Not me." Grace's attempts to negotiate fell flat. The trust Lucas had once had in her was beyond repair. Every word she said felt like another manipulation, another attempt to control the narrative. The divorce proceedings quickly turned contentious. Grace fought for partial custody of Caleb, Ella, and Chloe, claiming that separating her from them would be cruel. But the children themselves made their feelings clear. Caleb, who had become increasingly vocal about his anger, outright refused to see his mother. "Why should I talk to her?" he said to Lucas during one heated conversation. "She lied to all of us. She doesn't deserve to be in our lives." Ella, the quiet and thoughtful middle child, expressed her feelings in softer terms but with equal finality. "I don't hate her," she told Lucas one night. "But I can't look at her right now. I don't know if I ever will." Even Chloe, despite her tender age, seemed to sense the depth of her mother's betrayal. When Grace tried to visit her at school one afternoon, Chloe clung to her teacher, refusing to go near her. "I don't want to talk to her," she cried, her voice trembling with confusion and fear. Grace's humiliation only deepened as the court sided overwhelmingly with Lucas. Given her role in the affair and the financial scandal tied to it, the judge found her unfit to have primary custody. Lucas was granted full custody of all 3 children, with Grace receiving limited supervised visitation. For Grace, it was a crushing blow. The life she had worked so hard to maintain was slipping through her fingers, leaving her alone and disgraced. Public opinion was no kinder. The divorce, widely publicized due to the earlier scandal, became another topic of gossip. Grace was portrayed as a selfish, deceitful woman who had destroyed her own family for the sake of an affair. Friends who had once supported her now avoided her entirely. At work, colleagues openly whispered about her downfall, and even strangers treated her with open disdain. The weight of judgment pressed down on her, isolating her further. Lucas, meanwhile, focused on rebuilding his family. The transition wasn't easy. Caleb's anger often boiled over into shouting matches, and Ella withdrew into herself, struggling to process the upheaval. Chloe, too young to fully understand the situation, frequently asked questions that Lucas found impossible to answer. "Why can't Mommy live with us?" she asked one night, her big green eyes filled with confusion. "Mommy made some mistakes," Lucas said carefully, kneeling to her level. "But it doesn't mean she doesn't love you. It just means we have to live separately now." Chloe seemed to accept his answer, but her lingering sadness was evident. Lucas vowed to do everything in his power to fill the void left by Grace's absence. The first step in their recovery was creating a sense of stability. Lucas moved the family into a new house, away from the memories of their old life. It wasn't easy. Every decision, from choosing the neighborhood to setting up the kids' rooms, felt like another reminder of what had been lost. But the new environment gave them a fresh start, a chance to build new routines and memories. Lucas also leaned heavily on the support of his parents and extended family. Caleb began spending weekends with his grandfather, who taught him woodworking as a way to channel his frustration. Ella found solace in her grandmother, who encouraged her to express her feelings through journaling and art. Even Chloe, despite her confusion, found joy in her cousins, who treated her like a little sister and doted on her endlessly. Grace's attempts to reconnect with the children were met with resistance. She wrote letters and sent gifts, but Caleb refused to open them, and Ella returned hers unopened. Chloe, while curious about the packages, often asked Lucas for reassurance before touching them. "It's okay to look," Lucas told her, though his heart ached every time. Supervised visitation sessions were equally fraught. The children often sat in silence, refusing to engage with Grace despite her tearful pleas. On one occasion, Caleb stormed out halfway through, muttering, "This is pointless. She's not my mom anymore." Grace's humiliation in these moments was palpable. She had destroyed the trust her children had in her, and rebuilding it seemed an impossible task. For Lucas, watching her struggle elicited little sympathy. Her pain, while real, was a consequence of her choices that had devastated their family. Over time, Lucas began to see glimpses of healing in his children. Caleb's anger softened as he grew closer to his grandfather, and Ella began to smile more as her confidence returned. Chloe, though still grappling with confusion, began calling Lucas her real daddy without hesitation, a declaration that both warmed his heart and underscored the depth of Grace's betrayal. The divorce, though painful, became a turning point for Lucas and his children. It forced them to confront their pain head-on and gave them the chance to rebuild their lives on a foundation of honesty and trust. Though the scars of Grace's betrayal would never fully fade, Lucas knew they were moving toward a future where love and loyalty would guide them, rather than lies and deceit.